I remember very, very specifically. It was like I was watching a movie in slow motion when the change came, because I remember when Appetite for Destruction came out. I remember when the Guns N' Roses, Welcome to the Jungle, started getting high rotation on MTV.
Yeah.
And then I also remember, when Alice in Chains' Man in the Box came out. And I found them to be incredibly similar.
Yeah.
Obviously Guns N' Roses was a little bit more towards the, the rock sort of metal glammy side of things. But when Alice in Chains came out, it was such a new sound.
Yeah.
And it really did seem like it was almost overnight. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but in Vancouver, for example, it just seemed to me like every single band was all of a sudden, dressing like Alice in Chains and Soundgarden. I mean, I used to produce bands back in the day. I was cutting demos for up-teen bands. And a lot of those bands were, very, very influenced by that sound. And you actually watched their sound transition from this unique original sound they had. And it all started morphing into that grungy sound. And, what's fascinating, I find, about a lot of those bands that I worked with back in those days, and I'm sure it's the same, everywhere, you'll come across bands that you think have great talent and great songs. And, you believe in those bands and you think that they have what it takes to become a successful band. And so often what unfortunately happens is these great bands don't, they fail to execute. They don't launch. They just, all kinds of reasons, like,
of course, yeah.
And usually if it's not, music industry politics or, internal band struggles and problems, it just seems like something holds these bands back. And then what ends up happening after the fact, much like what happened with my band, you become this mythical unicorn band, and everybody talks about this band like, well, back in the day there was this band and they were really great. Well, people ask me that all the time. Like, it's one of the first questions people ask me when I do interviews, because we get together and we play shows every once in a while, and they're always like, why didn't you guys stay together? You guys were great. You could have been the best thing, which I totally think about, Age of Electric. I mean, in my opinion, Age of Electric should have been, the Tragically Hip, but you have your own story, right? So, we all have these stories, and what this kind of reminds me about is, so I've been researching these Seattle bands, and primarily this band called Creddypool. And what drew me to Creddypool was, the more information I got about this band was that, well, that's me.
You're right. Yeah.
Except they're called Creddypool and they're from Seattle and they're a different sounding band. But I think their story, is relatable to so many musicians and so many bands,
absolutely.
Like, who are these guys? Like, so anyway, after doing the research on this band and, tracking down, tapes and talking to people and, digging up information and trying to find photographs and stuff of these guys, I thought it was incredible to find out that, you have, sort of a connection with Creddypool as well, I believe, at some point. What I heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard that that Punchy, the guitar player from Creddypool, he was pretty tight with Duff. I mean, obviously being a Seattle band.
Right, yeah.
And I know that Duff was heavily involved in, punk rock and, more of the grungier type sound before, hooking up with Guns N' Roses. So I heard that Punchy, the guitar player from Creddypool, and Duff, loaded up the truck and, moved to Beverly.
They literally moved to Beverly, yeah.
Yeah, and the next thing you know, they're down, and hanging out at the Roxy and the Rainbow and the Whiskey. And I think Punchy was he was enrolled in he went to school down there.
MIT or
I think
whatever,
he went to
GIT or one of those things. So
he went down to do that, but I don't know. I heard that it didn't work out for him. Like, I'm not sure why, really. He didn't fit into the LA scene. It just
Right.
And I heard that once things started taking off, that he packed his bags and he got an offer to go back and jump into this project that was part of that grunge scene, which his buddies in Seattle said this is the place you got to be.
Right.
So he goes back up the coast. But did you ever meet him or have contact with him or play with the band or hear about the band, like when you guys were down in LA and stuff?
No, it's like talking about Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster when you bring it up in terms of like, when you meet somebody, because I have the same conversations about people who saw Jeff Buckley before he died or any of those kind of things that were kind of, oh, you were there, kind of thing. A lot of those creddypool things existed in cassette tapes with no song titles on the thing. Like, here, listen to this. You don't even know what, and you're like, what the hell is this? This is amazing. And then eventually, of course, it's on CDs, CDRs with no, eventually you kind of like pass these things around. Like, it reminded me of back in the day when that mixtape thing would bounce around, like, especially in the punk rock world, it was a lot more like, you would sort of like this cool band from Winnipeg, that cool band from DC, that cool band and you'd pass things around. But creddypool seemed to be one of those things that would kind of float around. And even the things that they were in prior to that, especially Punchy's earlier punk rock stuff, like bands like Personality Crisis from Winnipeg and all that kind of stuff. Those guys seem to cross paths with that whole scene a lot more. Because when Duff talks about going into Vancouver at 14 years old and playing like the Smiling Buddha and all that kind of stuff, that's the kind of stuff those guys were doing. And there's a whole circuit of punk rock houses across the country that you would crash at, and that's the scene. So the only connection I have is a bizarre. It feels like when you talk about the Loch Ness Monster, you see those, or that Bigfoot photo, this thing, and it's like, is a random photo of Punchy at, I want to say people been at the time, the girl I was seeing at the time who has the photo was like, I think it's from the Roxy, or I think it's from the Whiskey, but it might be from Madame Wong's or FX, because there was a whole scene going on down in LA when we talk about Guns N' Roses and the Sunset Strip. There was the Jane's Addiction thing. People forget about that. I really feel like Jane's was the kind of gateway drug into what really led to alternative sort of bashing a door down. And that's where I think Punchy was hanging, if you ask me. And I think that, that scene, like even the Seattle scene, I don't think anybody was really thinking like, we're going to play these dodgy clubs that are basically like Chinese restaurants during the day. And then they have a thing over in the corner where you can play. And then we're going to get signed and we're going to be big rock stars. But guys like Punchy never wanted to be big rock star anyway. He just wanted to play music, which I think is, as you saw, and I think we can talk about this too, in the 90s, it became like not as cool to be like wearing a Rolex watch or, playing a $5,000 Les Paul. It became like, I might have found this guitar. It's like, it's only got 5 strings because I couldn't afford, it became a lot more like legit, and authentic became the words that are very difficult things to bring up. But it wasn't so much about how fast you could play the guitar, even though Punchy came up like anybody else, probably learning Ted Nugent riffs or something, but that leads into, what's just like loud, heavy rock just turns into, the kind of punk rock that he became known for, or is sort of known for, and which doesn't really, I mean, you can see the translation into creddypool, but like a lot of punk rock musicians who went into alternative music, it carries the punk rock into more of a, structured, it's not like it's just straight up 2-minute pop punk songs. They're actually like became more, you can hear elements of, Sabbath and that kind of stuff. But I feel like a lot of bands like Smashing Pumpkins and that kind of stuff, to me, they feel like what the creddypool sort of like, that's what they must have paid attention to those guys.